here we are. It's December the 5th and we're ready for another day on the TooFatLardies 2019 Advent Calendar. Hope you're enjoying the treats we've got for you so far, and today we've got another fantastic soundbite for you. This time we're going to hear Richard telling us about his typical painting method.
Typically, I paint at my desk with my Mac here, so I can listen to podcasts or maybe watch stuff on YouTube. If it's the type of thing you don't really have to look at, you can just listen to. Alternatively, I paint in the workshop, depending on what I'm doing. Certainly if I'm doing terrain, I would tend to do that in the workshop, but we're talking here about figures. I paint in large batches, fairly, I think, significantly larger than what Nick and Sid do. I will tend to do a platoon at a time if I'm doing chain of command. And I paint on painting sticks, which are about a foot long, and originally were probably 3/4 of an inch by 1/2 an inch in dimensions, and I use a hot glue gun to stick the figures on those and then undercoat them. I undercoat with a black cart spray undercoat normally, or if I'm doing a unit that has got predominantly brown uniforms, so let's say British khaki or French or Soviets, I will use a Humbrol dark earth enamel undercoat for those, and again that's a spray can. My brushes are a mix of cheap acrylic brushes, which I use for things like dry brushing and for putting on the base block colours. And then when I'm going to put on detail, I'll use Winsor & Newton Series 7. Although I have recently tried out the Army Painter brushes, which I've been quite impressed with. Certainly the best one in there is the Kolinsky Masterclass brush, which I've found to be really good. But they will tend to be anything from size 1, size 0, and size 0 point, whatever it is, I don't know, smaller one. So that's the brushes I use. The way I do it is I block paint, and I'll do that using a fairly large brush, say probably a size 2 or 3, and I'll block paint all the colours on. And then I will either dip that using an Army Painter dip, although I don't actually dip, I paint it on, because I think dipping it and flicking it's probably the messiest method that I've ever heard in my life. And also, call me a cynic, but it seems to me to be designed to get you to waste most of the stuff. So I'll use a brush to brush that on. I'll use an old pig hair brush for that, because it's the type of thing that can really damage good brushes, and that's the type of brush you can get from an art shop for children's school art classes when they're like 5 years old and making a pig's arse of everything they touch. Alternatively, I might use a wash like an Army Painter Quick Shade wash, which are really nice and they dry a lot quicker. Once I've done that, I'll go through and I will paint on the highlights. So I'll paint on the highlights of all the clothes where you've got creases, and then I'll paint on the highlights to the faces. Finally, I add a wash to the faces. Now I use a flesh wash, which is very precious. It's an old Citadel colour flesh wash in one of those see-through tubs with a black plastic flip lid, and I've still got a couple of tubs of that left, and I use that in a very watered down fashion. And for me, I find that going over the hands and faces just gives a little bit extra depth there. And finally, I then highlight them up with ideally highlighting the nose, the 2 nostrils, the cheekbones, and the 2 chin, what do you call them, dimples. So all my figures tend to look a bit like Kirk Douglas, for those who are old enough to remember that. And then if I can be bothered, I certainly go through and highlight the fingers, but if I can be bothered, I'll do that carefully and do it with knuckles and, do it generally like that. But often I just think life is too short. Finally, when dry, I gloss varnish. I tend to try and leave it at least 24 hours because it's really important that army painter dip has loads of time to dry. In fact, I'd probably recommend with the army painter dip you left it at 36 hours. I use a gloss spray varnish and that's just something I get from a craft shop locally. It's not design specific. It's got Crystal is the name. You can get it from Homebase or any craft shop. And then finally, I go over that with a couple of light coats of Humbrol enamel matte spray. I find the enamel to be a lot tougher than the acrylic. And that has my figures painted and ready for basing. Remember, lard is for life and not just for Christmas.